This is one of the most brutal, sad, tragic tales in criminal history in Manchester city centre.
Manchester is a city that wears its history proudly. Millions of people visit every year for the music, the football, the shopping and the nightlife. But beneath the surface lies a very different story. A story of subterranean worlds, of forgotten burial grounds, riots, revolution, murder and mystery. Over the centuries, this city has witnessed some of the darkest moments in British history. Some changed the course of the nation, others have become little more than whispers and rumours passed down through the generations. Today we're stepping away from the usual tourist trail to explore Manchester's darker side, through historic pubs, hidden corners and places where the past still feels surprisingly close.
We're going to do a trail of haunted pubs, yes, but also some of the dark sites as well underneath the underbelly of Manchester as we go along. So it's a bit of a walking tour, a bit of a history tour, a bit of a dark history tour. So if you're ready for that's what you're signing up for in this video. So thank you to everybody that subscribes to the channel. Thank you to everybody that supports it by watching, commenting, liking, subscribing. Really, really appreciate it. That is enough waffle, let's wander. Stop number one brings us to one of the oldest and most iconic pubs in Manchester city centre, the Briton's Protection. Now this place has lots of history, it's absolutely gorgeous inside.
The Briton's Protection is one of Manchester's most famous historic pubs and one of the few surviving buildings connected to an area that has changed dramatically over the last 2 centuries. Although records vary slightly, the pub has stood here since the late 18th or early 19th century and takes its name from its role as an army recruiting station during the Napoleonic Wars. Originally known as the Ancient Briton, it later became the Briton's Protection, and despite the glass towers and modern developments that now surround it, remains one of the city's most loved heritage pubs.
Now there is a sign outside on the board and it says the Briton's Protection has stood proudly on the corner of Great Bridgewater Street and Lower Mosley Street since 1806. Famed for its enormous whisky collection, there's over 30 to choose from. A large mural of the Peterloo Massacre stands proudly on the walls, the only place to commemorate the 1819 protest for parliamentary reform, which took place just outside the Briton's front door, in which 15 demonstrators were killed and 700 more injured by sabre-wielding cavalry who charged the 80,000 strong crowd.
Stepping through the doors of the Briton's Protection is very much like stepping into a portal to a time long gone. The beer is always good and the treasures that have been preserved here are a delight in an age when so many towns and cities seem determined to strip away the character of their pubs in favour of a modern look. No, the Briton's Protection is exactly how a good English pub should be, and I for one absolutely love this place. The brick building with its slate roof was granted Grade 2 listed status in 1990, helping to protect it from demolition or unsympathetic alterations. Much of the interior remains largely intact from the 1930s, including the moulding ceilings, traditional layout and even the original urinals. What many people talk about here though is the mural that greets you as you walk through the entrance door. It depicts scenes from Peterloo. But what people seem to debate over is whether the mural itself is haunted. Because apparently stand here alone on a quiet day and some claim you might hear voices, footsteps or strong emotions from the mural. And when we get to the history of the Peterloo disaster, you will probably understand more about why that could be. It isn't the only paranormal tale attached to this place though. Over the years there have been reports of shadow figures crossing doorways and a mysterious soldier known as the Redcoat Deserter. Said to be the pub's most famous ghost, he supposedly wanders the building long after his military days end. Witnesses describe an oppressive atmosphere and on occasion the distant sound of drum beats echoing through the rooms. Paranormal investigators who have visited the pub claim to have captured unexplained footsteps, strange noises and even movement from objects that should have remained perfectly still. Now, whether there's evidence of something supernatural or simply the atmosphere of an old building with lots of history, it's impossible to say. But when a pub has stood here for more than 2 centuries and witnessed generations of Manchester life, perhaps it's inevitable that legends begin to take root.
We've left the Britain's Protection, that's about 2 minutes from that way. The next stop is about 2 minutes that way. But before we go any further, we have one more stop. Now, this is a little bit of a clue, the Tib Lock. So we're going to go down there and I'm going to tell you a little bit of the story. I learned something quite interesting when I was researching for this video, and I've got friends and family that were born and bred in Manchester, and some of them didn't even know this, so I thought I'd bring it to your attention today if you didn't know already. Now, a lot of the time when you are walking through modern Manchester, you're actually walking on top of a subterranean water world, because there is what is known as the River Tib. Now, this used to flow through the city. It was part of people's everyday lives, but as the city has grown and the river got more stinky, because obviously they were using it for sewerage and all sorts of disgusting things, they started to build on top of it, and now it's just there flowing in the darkness underneath our feet most of the time. However, if you come down, so from the Britain's Protection, before we go to the next stop, you will get to a place called Tib Lock. And this is the sort of area where I believe that the River Tib, meets the rest of the waterways in Manchester. And you'll notice in Manchester there are streets as well called like Tib Street. That was famous for the pet stores at one point, and that was named after the river as well.
Although hidden from sight for almost 2 centuries, the River Tib still shapes Manchester in ways that most people never realise. Its route can be traced through place names such as Tib Street, Tib Lane and Tib Lock. Small clues left behind by a watercourse that once flowed openly through the growing town. As the city expanded during the Industrial Revolution, rivers like the Tib became increasingly important. Its waters helped power machinery and supplied industries that were transforming Manchester into one of the world's great manufacturing centres. But progress, as we know, comes at a price. As factories multiplied and the population expanded, the river became increasingly polluted and prone to flooding. By the late 18th century, much of it had been forced underground into brick culverts where it remains today. Now, the Tib flows unseen beneath some of Manchester's most famous streets and buildings. Hidden beneath layers of brick, concrete and tarmac, it continues its journey through the darkness, passing beneath thousands of people every single day without them ever knowing it's there. What's perhaps most intriguing is that historians still disagree about parts of its exact route. Despite all the maps, records and research, sections of the river's underground journey remain surprisingly uncertain. For something that helped shape the city, it still manages to keep a few secrets of its own. But every now and then the Tib reminds Manchester that it hasn't gone away. In 2016, a 10-foot deep sinkhole suddenly opened up on Tib Street, a dramatic reminder that the hidden watercourse still flows beneath the city. A river buried beneath brick, concrete and tarmac for more than 200 years, still carving its way through the darkness below. And as we'll soon discover, it's not the only thing Manchester has buried beneath its streets.
The next stop on the trail, and it is the second pub that we are visiting, and again it's one of Manchester's most iconic pubs, recognised by its green tiles. So this is once again a very old building, and what's happened with this place is lots of modern infrastructure has been built around it, so it really sticks out like a sore thumb. But I think it's absolutely beautiful. I really wish we saw more pubs like this. So we're going to have a look inside, but before we do that, let me just tell you, it is meant to be haunted.
Once again, we find ourselves in another proper old-fashioned boozer, and I have to say I absolutely love places like this. From the vintage decor and old photographs, to the polished wood and cosy little rooms tucked away around every corner. The Peveril of the Peak, or the Pev, as the locals call it, feels like another pub from a bygone age. Built around 1820 and first registered as a public house in 1830, the Pev has been serving Manchester drinkers for almost 2 centuries. The exact origin of its name remains a mystery. Some believe it comes from Sir Walter Scott's novel, Peveril of the Peak, whilst others think it commemorates its famous stagecoach that once made the journey between Manchester and London in just 2 days. Over the years, it has attracted all sorts through its doors, including Manchester United's legend Eric Cantona, who was known to enjoy a pint or two here. Now, not every chapter of its history has been quite so respectable. During the Second World War, the pub reportedly gained a rather colourful reputation, with claims that it was used as a brothel by American servicemen stationed in the city. Like many old pubs, it has gathered its share of ghost stories over the years too. The rumour is that the ghost here is surprisingly helpful. In the past, it's supposedly tidied glasses, emptied ashtrays, and even given the occasional shove to revellers who've perhaps had one too many. Sitting though in these historic pubs of Manchester on our trail today, I often find myself wondering just how many stories these walls have heard over the last 2 centuries. How many secrets have been shared across these tables? How many celebrations, arguments, romances and heartbreaks? And I'm pretty certain that some of the tales we're following on today's trail will have been shared across these very tables, carried through the room on the murmur of conversation and the clink of pint glasses.
So the Pev and the Britain's Protection that we went to earlier, both iconic pubs in the city, and there's one other pub we're going to be visiting later on, and all 3 of them were witness to the Peterloo Massacre, which took place in the city in the summer of 1819. It's a really dark piece of history. It's something that should really never have happened in the way that it happened. So the next stop that we're going to be visiting, that's going to be more about, it's not far from here at all, but I'm going to tell you about what happened on that day if you don't know already. But yeah, this is why I've chosen this area, because it's where that sort of activity, that sort of history happened. I spy the Midland Hotel, or the back of the Midland Hotel. That's that there. If you haven't seen that video, I did a video all about the strange but true stories. Believe it or not, I think I called the video. There's some really interesting history and hauntings and an unexplained death at the Midland Hotel. Just outside the Manchester Central train station, and you've got the Midland Hotel there, you will come across the Peterloo Massacre memorial, which, to be honest with you, I've been past this before and didn't even realise what it was, so I feel quite ashamed to say that. But it's got the names of the people that were involved in that massacre. It's a tragic piece of history, really, but one that's clearly remembered by the city, so that's good.
Today, this area of Manchester city centre is a place where people rush to work, meet friends or wait for the tram. But on the 16th of August 1819, this area became the scene of one of the most infamous events in British history. At the time, fewer than 2% of the population had the right to vote. Many working people were struggling to survive, with rising food prices and widespread poverty creating growing anger across the country. Manchester had become a booming industrial town, yet many of those helping to build its wealth had virtually no political voice. On that summer morning, somewhere in the region of 60,000 people gathered here to demand reform. Contemporary accounts describe a crowd that was peaceful, orderly and determined. Many arrived dressed in their Sunday best. Families came together, banners were raised carrying messages such as reform, universal suffrage, equal representation, and even the simple word love. The main speaker was the radical reformer Henry Hunt, but before he had chance to properly address the crowd, local magistrates watching from a nearby building ordered his arrest. The local yeomanry were sent in to seize the speakers, but as they attempted to force their way through the densely packed crowd, panic erupted. One witness was the radical writer Samuel Barmford. He later recalled seeing cavalry arrive with swords drawn. At first, many people believed they were simply there to keep order, but then everything changed. And Bamford wrote, "Stand fast," I said. "They are riding upon us. Stand fast." What followed was horrifying. The cavalry slashed their way through the crowd that had nowhere to run. Bamford described seeing chopped limbs and wound-gaping skulls, groans and cries mingled with the din of that horrid confusion. Among the victims were men, women and children. Roughly 15 to 18 people were killed and hundreds more injured through sabre wounds, trampling and crushing. When the violence finally ended, the field was almost deserted. Bamford remembered abandoned hats, bonnets, shawls and banners scattered across the ground amongst the injured and dying. He described seeing people lying where they had fallen, some still groaning, others already beyond help. The event became known as Peterloo, a bitter reference to the Battle of Waterloo. But unlike Waterloo's soldiers, the men who charged into the crowd that day were attacking unarmed civilians. Although the authorities initially congratulated those responsible, public opinion slowly began to shift. Peterloo helped fuel demands for political reform, influenced movements such as Chartism, and ultimately played a role in expanding voting rights. It also inspired the creation of what would later become the Manchester Guardian newspaper. More than 200 years later, the names carved into this memorial serve as a reminder that many of the freedoms we take for granted today were paid for at a very, very heavy price.
Now there's something around here that just goes to show these were not aggressive demonstrators as such, because we've got unborn child of Elizabeth Gaunt, so clearly there were pregnant women at this protest. We're on Peter Street now, and there is a red plaque to commemorate this tragedy. Now it says St Petersfield's the Peterloo Massacre. On the 16th of August 1819, a peaceful rally of 60,000 pro-democracy reformers, men, women and children, were attacked by armed cavalry, resulting in 15 deaths and over 600 injuries. This was a really sad day for Manchester. And we're going to go to one more spot to do with this tragedy before we move on to something else in the grim tour. So the plaque I've just shown you is on the side of this hotel, and funnily enough, I believe that the Sex Pistols played here back in the day. Who is a Sex Pistols fan? Let me know in the comments. I am, that's for sure. So this pub played another role in the Peterloo Massacre. The rumour is that the injured and the dying were brought here. It was used as a bit of a makeshift hospital, so tables were used as hospital beds. The cellar, it was said, they used to stack up the dead bodies. So I can imagine during that time, all that frenzy. I mean, we're really not far from where it was all happening. There'd have been so much noise, there'd have been crying. This place would have been a little bit of a refuge, but I imagine the people that worked here, it would have been very chaotic, not what they were used to, certainly. They were running a pub. But yeah, it was a huge part of the community, and yeah, lots of history behind it. Although the pub that we actually see today has been rebuilt slightly. It's not exactly the same as it looks back in the day.
Named after Lieutenant General Sir Ralph Abercromby, the pub dates back to the 19th century and is one of the few surviving buildings in the area with direct links to the events of Peterloo. Historical accounts suggest some of those injured during the massacre were brought here to receive treatment, giving the building a unique connection to one of the most important events in Manchester's history. Now, it's difficult to imagine today, standing amongst construction sites, office blocks and busy city streets, but when the Abercrombie first opened, this part of Manchester looked very different. Rather than being surrounded by modern skyscrapers, the pub stood on the edge of St Peter's Field, overlooking a landscape of canals, mills and open ground as the rapidly expanding industrial town spread out around it. The pub is perhaps best known to some people as the building thought to have inspired the railway arms in the television series Life on Mars. Now, if you've never seen it, the show follows a Manchester police officer from 2006 who wakes up after a car accident to find himself transported back to 1973, where he continues working as a detective while trying to unravel the mystery of what has happened to him. Now, more recently, the Abercromby found itself fighting for survival. In 2014, it was threatened with demolition along with Bootle Street Police Station and Manchester Reform Synagogue to make way for the St Michael's redevelopment project, led by Gary Neville. Thankfully, the response was immediate. More than 3,500 people signed a petition to save this pub, arguing that its value went far beyond bricks and mortar. Eventually, revised plans were approved, with the development consortium agreeing to retain the building as part of the wider project. Reflecting on the decision, Neville later admitted, "There's no doubt we underestimated not the architectural importance of the pub, but the actual social community importance of the pub." The fact that we're still able to stand here and talk about the Abercromby at all is largely thanks to the people who fought to save it. Like several of the places we visited today, it remains a surviving link to an older Manchester, one that might easily have disappeared had public opinion not stepped in. And perhaps that's fitting for a building with such strong ties to Peterloo. After all, this is a city whose history has often been shaped by ordinary people making their voices heard.
So we've come off the trail now, we've come away from the main streets of the city and not very far away really, and it will find you in St John's Garden. Now this place used to be a church. You'll see the cross that's behind me, that commemorates where the church actually stood, and of course surrounding the church was the churchyard. Now there is a plaque up that tells you that there are 22,000 graves in this churchyard. Now from what I read, they didn't move any of those graves, so they are still beneath our feet. I think they put about 18-inch of topsoil over the top of them and then created this garden. So it is a very beautiful, peaceful space, but let's not forget this is also a memorial. It's the final resting place of so many people of the city.
Although it looks like a public garden today, this was once the site of St John's Church, an Anglican parish church built in 1769 by Edward Byrom, son of the famous Manchester writer and scholar John Byrom. At the time it was considered one of Manchester's most important churches and has since been described as the city's first significant example of Gothic revival architecture. For more than 160 years this was a place at the heart of community life. Weddings took place here, children attended school here, and generations of Mancunians worshipped here. At one point the church even housed one of Manchester's early fire engines, ready to respond to emergencies in the growing town. As Manchester expanded during the Industrial Revolution, so did the churchyard. Burials continued throughout the 19th century until the available space was exhausted and most graves were already full. By 1900, burials had effectively ceased altogether. Now ironically, it wasn't the churchyard that sealed the church's fate, but the changing city around it. As the area gradually transformed from a residential district into a commercial one, fewer people lived nearby and attendances began to fall. Eventually the parish was merged with nearby St Matthew's Church and the decision was taken to demolish St John's. The church was pulled down in 1931 and the following year the site was transformed into the gardens we see today. Many of the church furnishings and stained glass windows were relocated elsewhere, whilst the gravestones disappeared beneath a layer of soil. The church itself vanished, but the dead remained. Now today, of course, I've just said more than 22,000 people are still thought to lie beneath these gardens. Among them is John Owens, founder of Owens College, the institution that would eventually become part of the University of Manchester. Another is William Marsden, the campaigner credited with helping secure the Saturday half-day holiday for working people. Today, office workers sit on benches, birds sing in the trees, and the gardens feel a world away from the busy city streets beyond. Yet beneath the grass lies a hidden landscape of graves and forgotten stories. A peaceful place on the surface perhaps, but beneath our feet rests an entire lost community of Manchester's dead.
Now, this is beautiful, yes, and it is a little bit grim. Some people probably wouldn't like to spend their time walking over graves. However, this is the start of the trail where things are going to turn a little bit dark, because you will have heard of the resurrectionist men, the body snatchers. Well, that wasn't just limited to, say, Edinburgh, which we covered on a previous video. It did happen in Manchester as well, and it happened around Deansgate, around this area. So I couldn't find any historical connection linking it to this particular churchyard, but I'm going to take you somewhere in a minute where there is a link.
By the early 19th century, a dead body could be worth a surprising amount of money. Medical science was advancing rapidly, and anatomy schools needed human cadavers to teach the next generation of surgeons. The problem was that there simply weren't enough legal bodies available. In most cases, the only corpses that could be dissected were those of executed criminals, and demand far outstripped supply. That shortage created a grim opportunity. Manchester was booming, but life wasn't easy for everyone. Around Deansgate and the surrounding districts, poverty, overcrowding and poor living conditions were a reality for many. Against that backdrop, the promise of quick money proved tempting. A freshly buried corpse could fetch a sum equivalent to several weeks' wages for a working man. Now, across Britain's growing towns and cities, gangs of so-called resurrection men began targeting graveyards under the cover of darkness. Working quickly and quietly, they would dig down to the coffin, break it open and remove the body, often leaving clothing and jewellery behind, as stealing those could turn grave robbing into a much more serious offence. The practice caused widespread fear. Families sometimes watched over newly dug graves, while rumours spread whenever fresh earth appeared disturbed. For the body snatchers, a newly buried corpse represented profit. For everyone else, it was a violation of the dead. Manchester was no exception. As the city grew, so too did the demand for bodies, and before long, the resurrection men were operating here as well. One of the most notorious incidents happened just a short walk from where we are now.
201 Deansgate, the building behind me now. It's currently home to Electric Shuffle, which I believe is a popular destination for those seeking a little bit of entertainment in the city. But did you know that this was once the site of a Quaker burial ground? Now, this is also the site where one of the Deansgate body snatching scandals took place.
Today there is little sign that this was once a Quaker burial ground. The human remains buried here were excavated and removed in 1878 as the land was redeveloped and Manchester continued its relentless expansion. But one woman left this burial ground much earlier than that. On the evening of the 2nd of May 1828, 4 men walked into the Quaker burial ground that once occupied this site. Their target was the grave of a woman named Mary Howcroft. Working quickly under the cover of darkness, they dug down, removed her body, and placed it inside a trunk before leaving the burial ground unnoticed. The gang then transported the trunk to a nearby coach office, intending to send it on to London, where a fresh corpse could command a healthy price from anatomy schools and the medical lectures. It may seem strange that they wanted to send the body so far away, but distance offered a certain degree of protection. Whilst transporting a corpse across the country increased their risk of discovery, it also reduced the chances of anyone connected to the deceased recognising the latest specimen on a dissection table. It is a grim thought, but had everything gone to plan, nobody may ever have known what had happened. Fortunately, one employee at the Star Coach office became suspicious about the contents of the trunk. Curiosity got the better of him and he opened it to investigate. Inside was the body of Mary Howcroft. The police were called and one of the men involved, John Massey, was arrested. He was later sentenced to 3 months in prison for his part in the crime. Now, what makes the story particularly unsettling is how ordinary it must have seemed to those involved. By this point, body snatching had become a profitable underground trade. For the resurrection men, this was simply another job. For grieving families, however, it represented something far more disturbing: the realisation that even death offered no guarantee of peace. Now, today, shoppers, office workers and tourists pass through this part of Manchester without giving it a second thought. Yet beneath the modern city survives the memory of a crime that once horrified the people who lived here.
We're about a 2 to 5 minute walk around the corner from the Quaker burial ground that's obviously no longer there. Probably about a 10-minute walk from St John's churchyard, and we find ourselves at this empty shop building. Now if you look up, there is a red plaque which I'll show you in a second. This was Dr. Joseph Jordan's School of Anatomy. Now it is what it says. He was a surgeon, he was an anatomist. Now he was born in Manchester. He went to study in Edinburgh, where of course if you've watched the Burke and Hare videos you'll know there's lots of body snatching and scandal going on there. And he came back here, spent some time in the war, and he ended up opening his anatomy school here in Manchester. Now his history is surrounded by controversy because there are reports that he was in association with some of those body snatchers as well. So yeah, very controversial really, but yeah, this was the anatomy school, so another grim spot on the tour.
And this is where the story comes full circle. Standing here today, it's difficult not to wonder what these walls have witnessed over the years. During the early 19th century, this was one of the first private anatomy schools in Britain, and a place where aspiring surgeons came to learn about the human body. Dr. Joseph Jordan himself was an interesting character. As a boy, he was reportedly expelled from school after damaging a clock whilst taking it apart, trying to understand how its insides worked. Now that same curiosity eventually led him into medicine, and after studying in Edinburgh, he returned to Manchester where he established his anatomy school here on Bridge Street. But if the resurrection men were stealing bodies, then this is the sort of place where many of them were destined to end up. One can almost picture it: secret meetings taking place behind closed doors, money quietly changing hands, freshly stolen corpses arriving under the cover of darkness, whilst the families who had buried their loved ones slept unaware in their beds. A thriving black market emerged, with a fresh corpse capable of fetching as much as £10, which is a substantial sum of money when many working people struggle to make ends meet. To modern eyes, it seems shocking. Yet to many surgeons and medical students, these bodies represented knowledge. Every dissection revealed something new about the human body and helped to train the doctors who would go on to save lives. For others, however, it was a terrifying prospect. Many people feared the violation of the grave almost as much as death itself. Many Christians believed in the physical resurrection of the body at the Last Judgment. The thought of a loved one's corpse being stolen, dissected, or reduced to a collection of bones was not simply unsettling. For some, it raised genuine fears about what might mean for their eternal salvation. Eventually, the public outrage became impossible to ignore. The scandals surrounding body snatching, including cases such as the one we've just heard about involving John Massey, helped to lead the Anatomy Act of 1832, which changed how medical schools obtained bodies and largely brought the resurrection men era to an end. But standing here today, it's difficult not to reflect on the uncomfortable truth at the heart of this story. Medical science advanced because people were willing to study the dead. The question was always where those bodies came from.
If you're from Manchester, then the chances are you've already heard this terrible tale. If not, I'm going to go through it today for you. So behind me is a pub called the Rat and Pigeon. Before that, it was known as Mother Mac's, and it's here that a really terrible crime took place.
Our trail now leads us into Manchester's northern quarter, an area known today for independent bars, music venues, street art and nightlife. But behind the busy streets and creative reputation lies one of the darkest stories in the city's modern history. In 1975, former soldier Arthur Bradbury took over Mother Mac's, a pub on Back Piccadilly in Manchester's northern quarter. He moved in with his wife Maureen, their young daughter Alison, and his two stepsons Andrew and James. It should have been the start of a new chapter for the family. Instead, things quickly began to unravel. The pub struggled financially, relations with the brewery deteriorated, and concerns were raised about Bradbury's behaviour behind closed doors. Friends later spoke of violence, intimidation, and a household living under a shadow that few people fully understood at the time. Then in June 1976, everything came to a horrific end. After being told he was losing the tenancy, Bradbury flew into a murderous rage. During the early hours of 17th of June, he killed his wife, his daughter, and both stepchildren. Now, when cleaner Anne Hennigan arrived for work later that morning, she too became a victim. With the bodies hidden upstairs, Bradbury set fire to the building and threw himself into the blaze. As firefighters battled the flames, they made a discovery that shocked Manchester. One by one, bodies began to emerge from the wreckage. What initially appeared to be a tragic fire quickly became one of the city's most notorious murder investigations. The pub was eventually rebuilt and reopened. Today it's known as the Rat and Pigeon. Yet despite the passing decades, the events of that morning remain difficult to comprehend. Perhaps because this wasn't some distant castle, battlefield or ancient legend, it happened here in a city centre pub, within living memory. A reminder that sometimes the darkest stories aren't hidden centuries in the past, sometimes they're far closer than we'd like to think. Leaving the northern quarter behind, our trail now takes us back towards the oldest part of Manchester.
Now, the very final stop on our trail today is the Chetham's Library, which is a really, really iconic location in Manchester city centre. And it is here that the occultist John Dee, who had associations with Elizabeth I, it was here that he was said to have summoned the devil.
Tucked beside Manchester Cathedral, Chetham's Library is one of the greatest survivors of the city. Founded in 1653 and housed within buildings dating back to the 15th century, it holds the distinction of being the oldest free public reference library in the English-speaking world. For centuries, scholars, writers and curious minds have passed through these doors in search of knowledge. And few men were more curious than John Dee. Mathematician, astronomer, astrologer, royal advisor and occultist, Dee was one of the most fascinating figures of the Elizabethan age. He advised Queen Elizabeth I, owned one of the largest libraries in England, and spent much of his life pursuing knowledge where he believed it could be found. That pursuit eventually led him into far stranger territory. According to local legend, Dee visited Manchester and spent time within these ancient buildings, attempting to communicate with supernatural beings. Some versions of the story claim him and his associate Edward Kelly conducted rituals in an effort to contact angels. Other versions go much further, suggesting that something darker answered instead. The tale tells of strange ceremonies, mysterious symbols and an encounter with the devil. Whether that actually happened is another matter entirely. Historians generally view the story as folklore rather than fact, but like so many legends, it has proved remarkably difficult to kill. Perhaps because places like this encourage the imagination, surrounded by ancient books, worn stone walls and centuries of accumulated history, it doesn't feel impossible that unusual stories might take root. And in many ways, that's what this trail has really been about. Today we've followed hidden rivers flowing beneath the streets, stood above forgotten graveyards, traced the footsteps of body snatchers, visited pubs haunted by ghosts and murder, and ended our journey with tales of demons and forbidden knowledge. Some of the stories are unquestionably true, others perhaps blend with fiction, but most exist somewhere in the murky space between documented history, local folklore and human imagination. But perhaps that's what makes cities like Manchester so fascinating, because beneath the restaurants, office blocks and shopping centres, lies another city entirely. One built from old memories, whispered stories, half-forgotten tragedies and legends that refuse to die. And if there's one thing I've learned today, it's that Manchester still keeps plenty of secrets.
So that is it. Thank you to everybody for watching the video. Please do comment below what you thought of the stories. Now next week, so this Sunday, I am filming in somewhere different. So I am going to be in Kingston upon Hull, or Hull, or Hull as locals call it, and I'm going to be taking you on a little bit of a dark tour related to Jack the Ripper. So you might connect Jack the Ripper with Whitechapel. This video we're connecting Jack the Ripper with Hull. So if you want to come along on that, please do stay subscribed, stay tuned, and I'll see you next Sunday. Stay safe, stay curious, and don't have nightmares.